Hello everyone. In this video we're going to be making the community center from Stardew Valley so I can take my addiction to this game to the physical plane. Recently I've propelled myself back into playing Stardew Valley, and probably one of my favorite parts of it is restoring the community center, so I wanted a permanent physical reminder of my crippling obsession. And all I'm doing here is gluing about 4 walls together. Lady. And now we're just going to hesitate before finally picking a place to glue it down. And I'm going to trim the base a little bit so it'll be easier to maneuver around and use as a basketball hoop. Now let's add some more structure to it so it actually starts looking like the community center. I'm just going to ready up my spell to attach it, and boom, look at that. And this doesn't use a lot of mana, so just do the same thing on the other side and boom. What makes this craft special is actually due to my indecisiveness. There are just so many cool variations of it that asking me to choose is like asking me who I want to marry in the game. My answer would just be yes. And now I'm adding the columns on the corners of the building and cutting out the windows. I made some door templates so I can trace them on either side and cut it out with the box cutter. Now that we have a rough base, it's time to turn this piece of trash into something much cooler. Trash with popsicle sticks on it. Here's me preparing for the pain and consoling myself with a piece of candy. I'm cutting off all the ends of these popsicle sticks so they can lay flush against each other and look like actual planks. And now that we have all this wood looking like wood, we're gonna glue it onto the base. And it's done! Wow, cool. That didn't take long. This side is after the upgrade, and this side is before the upgrade. Now it's looking pretty good, I'm just not quite sure what's missing. You have been fooled. I knew all along it was missing a roof. I decided to add some tape at the seams just to make sure the edges didn't fall off. And now I'm gonna weather the panels on the side of the building just like I did with the panels on the front. What to do next? Oh, the roof. The roof for the community center is thankfully pretty straightforward. It's just a bunch of rectangles. Just grab your box cutter that desperately needs a new blade and measure out a hearty serving of roof tiles. And now I'm going to take the comically long roof tiles and trim them down into about 1-inch sections. I think I need a bowl. With all the roof tiles cut out, I'm going to hot glue them onto the base. Oh, let me just get this little glob. Ow, ow. And I'm not too worried about keeping all of the tiles at a perfect angle because it makes it look extra roofy when you paint. And now we're about halfway through with the roof, and I just wanted to go around and clean up the edges. After all this work, the community center looks a bit sleepy, so let's tuck him in for a nap. Alright, it's time to get up. Oh, wow, look at that. The roof is done. And now just ready up your next spell to clean up the door and window cutouts. Perfect. Oh. What's that in there? Wow, the spell did the other side for me too. Well, let's just try the other side now. Damn, looks like I'm out of mana for now. But that's okay, because this side is pretty simple, no magic required. I just traced the design of the shutters onto some foam and cut it out. We'll need 8 total for all of the windows. To make them look less like foam and more like the wood in the game, I'm taking this big toothpick tool thing and drawing in a wood texture. Alright, and now that we have this foam looking like nut foam, we're going to focus back up on the windows to add a popsicle stick border. Now once you've put a border around all 4 windows and everything's looking good, ruin that by gluing on the shutters far too early. But in all seriousness, if you plan to make this, then wait until after you paint to glue down the shutters. Wow, it's looking more and more like the community center by the minute. But we're missing those 2 columns on either side of the door. To make these columns, I'm just roughly measuring the height I need them to be and then cutting straight lines down. Don't cut all the way through the foam, just cut enough to be able to separate each strip. I bend them slightly until it looks sufficiently column-like, then glue it onto a slightly thicker piece of foam that serves as the back of the pillar. And now we're going to make the pillars on this side look a bit more distressed, just like they do in the game before you upgrade. This feels mildly sacrilegious to deface my craft, but I bear with the pain knowing that these cracks and crevices will be the vehicles to an abundance of moss and greenery growing out of them. Alright, it's looking pretty accurate to the in-game model. We just have to find something to build the clock with, and I'm not really sure what I can... Oh, well, this looks like it would work. Perfect. I'm using the cap of the Mod Podge as a template so I can cut out 2 foam circles for the clocks on either side of the model. Now since my blade is about as sharp as melted ice cream, I'm going to sand down the rough edges until they're completely smooth. Nurse, scalpel. That's Sculpey. I said scalpel. Thank you. Now that we have smooth circles, we're going to add some detail to the clocks. I first started with the outer rim for both of the clocks. I cut them to size and then glued them down onto the foam circles. Then I took whichever one looked the worst and used that one for the worn side of the model. I did the same technique I used on the shutters on the rim of the clock to give it a wooden texture. Wow, looking pretty... looking pretty good. My mana is replenished, so I'm just gonna finish the clocks with a spell. Perfect. I haven't seen my kids in 10 days. Wow, it really came together with a clock on it. Now we'll do the same thing on the other side, and as always, when you have a circular object, you must apply the hot glue in a spiral. Moving on to some smaller details, we're going to turn this foam into foam stone by shaving off the harsh corners and cutting out between where I want each individual rock to be. Now to defile my craft yet again, we're going to remove parts of the roof on the worn side just like you see inside the game. Alright, now that this side of the roof is sufficiently busted, the upgraded side needs a bit of work in the form of a chimney. And making it is pretty easy. All you have to do is... And then cut off the excess and you should be all good. Now this is looking sufficiently chimney-like, all it needs is a top. Damn, smoking hot. Then just glue your chimney onto the roof and make sure it's sturdy. And it's looking good, but something's missing. Oh yeah, this thing. I made 4 of these simple planter boxes off camera for the next part of the build. Nurse, Sculpey. Not again. Now we're gonna make the accessories, starting with the plants, the leaves, and the vines. Just have to open this, alright, maybe a little bit more strength, but oh, too much strength. Since Stardew Valley is actually a farming sim, the plants in the game are pretty awesome, so I just tried to make mini ones that look as similar as possible to the ones in the game. For the leaves, I'm using the simplest technique in the book. I'm just rolling on some clay flat and using the end of a curve tool to cut out a bunch of the same shape. Off camera, I also curved and rolled some of them to add diversity. And now we're gonna make those beautiful Kelly green awnings above the windows. The back of the awning is just a rectangle that I'm adding a bit of volume to with this noodle of clay. And then I'm taking a slightly thicker roll of clay and cutting off the end so they're equal in length. Once you smooth the edges down, put it with everything else so we can put it in the oven. While those are baking, I painted 1 coat of Mod Podge mixed with some white paint over the entire model to seal everything in. I'm painting the chimney in a dark gray that I'll later dry brush with lighter colors and moving right onto the roof. I'm part of the cheap paint gang, so almost everything requires 2 to 4 coats of paint to give me a full opaque finish. This is also where I realized that painting with the shutters on would be near impossible, so I cut them off as neatly as I could and set them aside. Alright, this is taking too long. Wow, cool. With the base for the roof, columns, doors, windows, and the edge of the clocks done for now, we can move on to the walls. The updated side is a really gorgeous purple that took a lot of coats to get right. Being part of the cheap paint gang has its benefits until you actually need to paint. And in the short while before the clay is done baking, enjoy a satisfying, clean paint line compilation. Now back to our regularly scheduled programming. The paint is good enough on this side, but we still have the other side to do. To be frank, I don't feel like doing it, so let's break out another spell. Wow, it even cleaned my desk. Now I'm going to paint the smaller areas like the steps and the door on this side. I'll also be adding the panels and the windows, which I painted to match. Now in the upgraded version of the center, the windows and doors are so new and shiny that it reflects the blue of the sky, so I cut out a square from a clear plastic plate, painted it blue, and glued it down behind the windows. Then I had a long, grueling, and intense painting session with the clock. But it ended up turning out pretty good. Moving on, since the clay is out of the oven and primed, I'm going to start painting. In this moment I knew I was using the LaCroix of paint, so I paused in anguish. But eventually they turned out pretty good after 800 coats. So here's what we're working with now, with most of the accessories added, and what this model needs now is a dry brush. I started with a very yellow toned brown since the paint dried a tad more red than I wanted, and I topped it off sparingly with a much lighter, almost white brown to give the foam a more believable wood texture. Then I dry brushed the chimney with a few different grays, starting dark and ending with an almost white. And here is how it's looking so far. Dry brushing adds much needed depth to a model. Now for the least tedious and least frustrating part of the build, painting every individual leaf, vine, and flower. Obviously my methods did not work in the beginning, but I found my groove. Now let's make quick work of these leaves and pick up the next one. Pick up the next one. Finally. Oh, you. Now let's retire these leaves and get to painting the bigger pieces of foliage. This part was a lot easier. I just painted the flowers and then I painted the leaves a dark green before going back in once it dried with a lighter green to add some depth. Now I must confess I've been keeping a secret from you all. You've probably been wondering where the door is for the updated side of the community center, and well, I tried making it out of foam but it just looked like garbage. So I ripped it in half and forced it to watch me craft its superior successor. Now let's take this drab piece of clay and turn it into a fab piece of clay. I baked it, painted it, and then started attaching the greenery to the model, starting with the planter boxes under the windows. And then I covered up the piece of foam I sprinkled dirt onto with some fake moss. I repeated the process with the plants and moss on the other side of the model until I could no longer look at it with self-hatred. And now comes the fun part that came from the fruit of our labor. Or, well, the leaf of our labor? Now we can decorate all the cracks and crevices with moss, leaves, and vines until this dusty community center can rival other nature-laden structures that tickle our satisfaction bone. The last plant we have to add is the queue hanging basket on the updated side of the model, and we can finally begin painting the Pelican Town signs on each side. It's looking pretty good, but I did just lie because that isn't the last plant we need to add. We have to add some hanging vines over the sign we just painted. Now we can focus on the other side, which has a sign on a wooden plank as opposed to right on the wall. I traced out a rough sketch of the words with a pencil and went over it a couple times in purple. It looks a bit rough right now, but after adding a few more coats of purple and cleaning up the lines with the same brown, it looks a lot better. And now it's time to give this craft the base it deserves. Well, that was easier than I thought, but that spell didn't finish the job, so I guess we have to. I'm shaving the harsh corners off the base so it tapers into the ground, giving it a more natural effect. Since the base is on, I'm adding the stone path at the bottom of the stairs and the bottoms for each column, and then shaving it off a bit so it also blends into the ground. And to these rocks I'm adding some texture with extreme precision and technique before I bippity boppity boop the base coat on. Originally, I wanted to add more 3D texture to the base, but I don't have static grass, nor do I have a static grass applicator, so I just settled for some textures I scratched into the foam and several coats of paint. I started by taking a green much darker than the base and adding wisps of it all over. After it dried, I added another lighter color using the same technique of random strokes. After painting the rest of the base, struggling desperately to overlook all the flaws to feel even a modicum of happiness towards my craft, I finally finished. And here it is. Wow, you made it all the way to the end. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the crafting, and if you have any suggestions on a craft you'd like to see from me in the future, then leave it down in the comments below and I'll add it to the list that's already way too long. Alright, see you next time!